Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sean. I run Artichoke Capital. We're seed investors in Web3, based out of Singapore. And we're here today to talk about go-to-market and getting distribution in Web3. I'm your moderator for today, and we have a great panel of founders and operators today. I think across this stage, I think the team has raised probably upwards of, I don't know, 200 million in the last 2 years. And so let's hear from some of the experts. Maybe before we start the panel for real, I want to share a disclaimer. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer by training. And so we're invested in some of these teams, but none of this is meant to be advice on what you should buy. So maybe let's go down the list and get each speaker to introduce themselves, a bit about their projects. And I don't know, Paul, you want to start?
Hey everybody, my name is Paul Kim. I'm the CEO and founder of Notify. We are a Web3 messaging and notifications service and infrastructure, and we power probably around like 55 projects to do a lot of consumer messaging and across 25 plus blockchains.
Hey guys, my name is Smokey, one of the co-founders of Berachain. We are an EVM-compatible L1 built on the Cosmos SDK and powered by proof of liquidity. We allow users to turn their liquidity into a form of security and power applications building on the network. There's 200 plus teams building on the ecosystem, everything from DeFi, GameFi, social, whatever you could look for. So excited to be here.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim Wang. I'm the CEO of Elixir Network. We're building a DPoS network for order book liquidity. We currently power about 40 to 50% of all the exchanges that are building on top of us, and have a bunch of integrations coming up.
I'm Rishi, co-founder of Movement Labs. We're bringing the Move VM to Ethereum, so building the fastest and most secure layer 2 on Ethereum.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Heinrich. I'm the founder and CEO of Zero G. We're the first modular AI chain. We help launch AI DApps through the fastest programmable data availability layer available today. And a couple of weeks ago, we came out of stealth and announced our 35 million pre-seed.
All right, so in crypto, we always talk about technology. I guess on this panel, we want to talk a little bit about how we bring the technology and the products that people are building to market. And so maybe I can kick this off with a question around, I guess, thoughts on driving community growth, whether that's memes, social media engagement, and so on. Given that there's a guy on the stage with a bear hat on, maybe Smokey, you wanna kick that off. I think you guys have like a million plus followers on Twitter, X, and you have a big personal following as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think the most interesting thing I've seen about the community growth side over the last few years has been that it's very tough to actually force it, right? For us, a lot of what happened with Berachain was a series of somewhat engineered happy accidents, and us just planting the seeds for something to happen, and then a number of things going right, partially on purpose, partially by accident. The way that we think about it the most, though, is that your early community, like the first 50, 100 members, whatever that might be, is probably the most fundamental thing about the trajectory of your project's culture. I think the same way that it's commonly said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, you can say a lot of the same for a community, right? When you have a certain initial node set or an initial group of people, they attract more like-minded people. And what we found has been incredibly important for us is just having a group who were very emblematic of barbells, horseshoe theory, whatever you want to call it. Both far left on one hand and just thinking about the stupidest thing possible and saying, yes, there's a picture of a bear, I like it. And then on the other side, the far right curve who thinks, okay, there's an interesting liquidity mechanism here, there's something that aligns liquidity and security, this can increase the capital efficiency of my project, so on and so forth, right? So I think it all does come down to that initial set and then making sure that those groups stay engaged, they're rewarded over time in a non-synthetic manner, and that you actually spend time with them, as ironic or as perhaps as obvious as that sounds. So initial set is everything in my opinion.
Let's keep this casual so that I'm not talking all the time. So anyone, I guess, have thoughts on how you I guess it's easier said than done, right? Like building that initial sort of like magic around the community. How do you actually how do you iterate on that stuff, right? Because some things work and some things don't. And, anyone can speak.
For us, it happened very organically initially because we were still pretty much in stealth. And what we noticed is that people had a specific way of engaging with us. So we got a lot of memes in our Discord channel very early on, and so we just totally played into it and very much talked about our key messaging. Here's how we think about us. Here's kind of the technology angle. And that got us a lot of kind of loyal followers initially that just consistently like retweeted and said like, hey, something big's coming. And that just happened very organically initially because of the subject matter that we were building. But then once we came out of stealth and did huge PR release, we got like 100,000 followers literally overnight through a PR release, and then doing campaigns through like Galaxy and other types of platforms. And so that core of the community though stayed very strong, and that was in place before all of the other stuff happened around it. And so I would highly recommend figure out who your core kind of user is, and we also segment it into different groups. So we think about it from a supply and a demand side. So supply would be people like validators, like developers, and then on the demand side, it'd be more like kind of retail users and traders and so on. And so we had that initial core in place, and then just because of that, we're able to grow it through some of the regular kind of marketing campaigns.
I think on the DevRel side, what we saw is a lot of community members like publishing updates to docs, publishing their own versions of documentation, creating their own user demo apps. We actually made like a DevRel hub from the community in the Discord itself, because there's one guy who was like constantly publishing new Twitter articles and publishing new developer relations stuff like almost every week, and it ultimately led us to like hiring him, because we were like, we love your content, really appreciate the work you're doing. But I think focusing on the technical side is a different angle that we saw, just given that we're pushing new programming language and it's already a pretty small community. So being in touch with the small developer community and then growing it as we scale is important to us.
I think for us, we got a little lucky because we approached it a little differently. A lot of our customers or followers are basically projects and kind of the founders of those projects. So we were kind of curating that community instead. So we were going to CTOs of projects and just sharing what we were providing as a service. And we kind of got lucky, but to not have a Discord or a community like most of you guys did. But I think it's part of the journey of kind of like getting into the next cycle of the market. Eventually I think you need to have the curation and be very strategic about who you want to build that community for. Taking a lesson from you guys, I think that's kind of how we're also architecting our approach as well.
I guess like one of the things I would add is like for us, we kind of partnered with Monad fairly early, and like they've obviously cultivated a very strong community with a lot of memes and kind of user-generated and community-generated content. Obviously, Elixir, from a branding perspective, has a lot of kind of these kind of liquidity-related memeability, and so like there's we call our Telegram group like the cult, and every time somebody joins, like people get dipped into the liquidity, and so that's been a nice flywheel just in terms of generating net new users and net new interest in the project.
Yeah, maybe one thing I add to it too is one specific thing that we did that was very intentional was to create a very distributed cap table. So we had probably around 70 plus investors on our cap table, like Hack and Bankless and DAO5 and Delphi, and a bunch of other really great angels and funds and Artichoke Capital, of course. And those investors then also brought in the friends that they knew into the community as well, and it created a really high quality initial community set as well that we could build around. And so that was one intentional thing that we did as well.
Let's go down like a few different sort of, I guess, categories of community engagement in crypto. Maybe the first and most obvious one is like, I guess, what's the role of airdrops, and how do you think about using that to I guess maybe what's your view on airdrops, and how do you use that sort of usefully, right, to engage the community over a longer period of time?
I think the most notable topic is points, and the question is points good long term, short term? I think Smokey has a strong opinion here, but I'm generally like, I think points is a short term thing and not good to building community long term because they're just gonna be like vampire attacking each different chains, the same 5-10 people just going to each different chain and getting their airdrop and leaving. So some things we're working on is a guilds program, which we'll announce like probably end of the month, which incentivizes folks and developers to contribute in different ad categories, whether it's like developer relations, whether it's making memes, making art, whatever, and contributing to medals, which could accrue long term. So it's not just like short term points, airdrop and dump. It's more of a long term vested interest in creating leaderboards for who's contributing longest to the ecosystem.
I'm gonna say like points actually is good long term. I think it just puts a lot of pressure on the core projects to build better products and to retain the customers long term. Because like you're never gonna get rid of points, right? Points exist in Web 2. You get rewards or Amex cashback or whatever it is. I think it kind of promotes builders to build more distinct and user favorable projects to actually like think about what they're building and how to actually deliver it. And I think leading into it further will probably be better for the entire ecosystem because there's no way we're going to get rid of points.
What about when the points get unlocked or tradable? Like, where does that happen, right?
Well, I think to that point is like build better products, right?
It's hard to do.
The gauntlet's thrown down, so eventually people who are going to farm. Right, and I think you got to keep them to come back. You got to retain them, and I think that's like more of a long-term journey than what people are usually signing up for.
Yep. Just to add to that, totally agree. Points are awesome, but when you then actually do airdrop campaigns, it's very much a mindshare economy, and so you get a lot of mindshare if it's a big airdrop. But then launch it with staking as well. So it's just my recommendation, because you want to keep some of that outflow also within the ecosystem so that it can be reused. And there's going to be airdrop farmers very hard to avoid. And you want really true usage and true users to be engaged. So be very smart in terms of where you airdrop to, what communities you airdrop to, who you then drive to have traffic. Maybe you dropped into a very high quality founder group or developer group, and then they're like, what is this thing? I want to actually engage and check this out. And so it's very much a attention marketing mechanism that can work really well.
Man, there's so much to say about airdrops, because we've seen the farmer armies relatively recently. I think that my take on a few different levels here is, I think points are bad. I think they're an interesting mechanism, and I think they effectively enable very effective speculation on what the value of something might be. But I think they're just spicy unregistered securities, as many tokens are as well. So I think they have a rough future ahead of them in many cases. And I think they really do incentivize a lot of artificial farming that can have relatively rough long-term consequences. Airdrops themselves are very interesting mechanisms, and I think that we'll see more people playing with different types of airdrops in the future, whether that be certain burn mechanisms, whether that be vesting periods, whether that be variable amounts of claiming depending on how long you've been engaged in something, or continued activity, so on and so forth. I think that design space is very interesting, but I think the concept as a whole is absolutely wild outside of the Web3 space, right? Like, in what world you just get dropped free money for having, existed in a given space for a while, right? So very interesting and a great tool for alignment. And I actually think that it's actually not a bad thing if an airdrop causes your price to get plowed. Look at Celestia, for example, right? Arguably one of the most impressive airdrops of the last little while in terms of people being happy, in terms of creating a relatively low price for a number of stronger buyers to enter and then just action to rip. I think there's a lot of interesting things that one can do there, but my take is that you can use the airdrop effectively to make sure that people love you, right? Like finding those strong communities, finding those early supporters, finding those developer groups, whatever it is, who you want to be on your side, and having them aligned with you for some period of time. Dimension did a good job of this with the Penguins. Athena did a good job of this with the Miladies. I think actually the NFT airdrop meta is also something that's very interesting, because when you think about what actually forms, communities or active groups in the Twitter ecosystem and the broader crypto ecosystem, NFTs are one of those few groups. I'm obviously a little bit biased there, but I actually do think there's a very promising space around effectively arbitraging NFT cults.
I think what Celestia pioneered is for the air. I don't know about pioneer, but when they got airdrop, no one could sell it because no one could figure out how to use osmosis, and I still don't know how to use it.
Whoa.
And then B, even when you figure it out, like you wanted to stake it now because you wanted the airdrops eventually that people were alluding to. It became a whole thing in CT where it's like if you stake X amount of TIA, which is like I think it's like 5 to 10K, you qualify for like 20 different airdrops. They're all allegedly airdropping TIA, and then some projects that kind of didn't do that eventually. But I think creating utility, which is like additional airdropping farming, so it's like further layers of Ponzi's. But if you can create some kind of incentive to hold a token, not dump after the airdrop, that's bullish.
No, I think that's like evolving, right? I think this whole new season that kicked off in the last couple months is going to just put a lot more pressure on evolving what points mean or airdrops mean. So, yeah, I mean, to everyone's point, having utility on top of what the airdrop is absolutely critical, but I don't think people thought about that 2-3 months ago or 6 months ago. But now we're thinking about it.
The utility is airdrops. Always.
What do you think is a good? I guess some people have talked about Celestia as a good airdrop. What is a less good airdrop example?
Chains that didn't do an airdrop and then like pissed off the entire community, and we know a few of those chains that didn't do it, and then they have like all these people, like millions of people, or not millions, like thousands of people farming this airdrop and expecting to like receive compensation, and the founders like, nah, we're not gonna do it, and that turns off the entire community against them basically. We saw this recently with the notable big launches, and those chains probably aren't going to be around shortly. No names.
Which chains?
You know which names.
How about the role of influencers? Like, how important are influencers in trying to build that community and I guess explain some of the things that you guys are building? Right? There's a bunch of there's the 5-second pitch for what you're building, and then there's like the 5-hour technical explanation for what the differentiation is. Like, what's the balance, you think, and how do influencers play a role in that?
I think we've done a decent job working with influencers and KOLs to educate the community, because our kind of thinking through like trading infrastructure and order books is actually quite complex. And so having an outside in view from somebody who understands but is like educated and uses like normal parlance to explain something that's like relatively complicated to the community is actually really helpful. And obviously it helps with like distribution. They have net new users, whether it's they're in DeFi or NFTs, right? Like if you're not participating in DeFi from before, like having an influencer guide you into the ecosystem actually is a good way to get net new users into your ecosystem.
Yeah, I'd say there's 2 types of key influencers. One is much more narrative-driven, long-term thinking, building the story with you over time, talking about like new innovations, going really deep on some technical angle, and then the next week doing another angle on it. And then the second type is much more about the hype generation and finding and giving you mind share, especially important for token launches and so on. And so it's very important to cultivate both over time. And so one of the things that we've done is kind of a couple phases of KOL rounds, so that there's kind of a incentive alignment with different types of KOLs. And so I just add that to the conversation.
Yeah, I think everyone here probably has at least a minimum of 50 investors in their rounds. So I think the KOL rounds, to kind of Michael's point, is where I think the meta is shifting more towards. It's very difficult to see any round being constructed now with less than like 10 VCs or 10 people on the cap table. So I think there's many ways to get to kind of like influencing and getting community behind. And I think the KOL rounds are a nice little way to kind of bridge that really quickly.
I think that on the influencer side, sort of like what Michael was getting at, there's 2 types, and I guess I'll look at a different set of types. There's one who are like, dialed in, relatively smart, engaged influencers who know what they're talking about, who are often project founders or, solo angel VCs and have just been in the space for a while and seen some stuff, and can actually, discuss what you're doing from a somewhat educated point of view, be helpful with connections, generally be value positive. Then there's also just like your straight up shills, right? There's your shills who will say, hey, we have like 300K followers and like we have such a big community and we're gonna get all of our users to do this and that with you, and 9 out of 10 times those are absolute bullshit, and those will just be a waste of time for you and your project. But I think if you err more towards the latter and probably get a couple of the shills involved, that seems to be like the ideal, distribution. And that's when you look at these guys like Crypto Man Ran and like Mario Nowfall and whatnot, like who are traditionally seen as very mid-curve, but are great at some degree of retail distribution for later stage projects. So little column A, little column B, best taken with a grain of salt when it comes to influencers in general.
Yeah, I think you want the more technical crowd to start off with when you're like a little bit far out from TGE. And then when you're getting close into distribution, you probably want the more shilly kind to get retail in.
What's the most overrated and underrated user acquisition channel?
I think ambassador programs are really corny. I've seen a lot of people try to use those for like user acquisition and like, I understand the value of user-generated content, but in 9 out of 10 cases, like these ambassador programs just end up as a weird set of tasks, or like, hey, you have to make this many memes and this many, educational posts. And I think if you try to force that, then you end up driving out users who you actually want to maintain over the long run, and you just end up with a bunch of spicy bots, right? Like they're not bots, but they're bots as people. Right, so like they're NPCs at heart, and I don't think that's what you want to build a community, or to build like an audience as a project. So I think that, yeah, ambassador programs can be done right if you just use that to empower the people who are already effectively doing that within your community, like naturally, and just say, hey man, like thank you so much, like here's some swag kind of thing. But if you do this weird like taskified, like make X posts to earn Y token system, I think that's fucked.
I think what's underrated is most in-person stuff. So meetups in person, when it's like not even orchestrated by the foundation of the entity, and just like third-party community groups in like different areas of the world, just meeting up to talk about your project and work on cool ideas together. It's something that we're rolling out like close to the end of this month, and I think that in-person time in such a decentralized and digital age leads to like tighter bonds, and that can translate into 10x experiences for project founders and the ecosystem itself.
Just to kind of hop on that point, like one of our largest traffics is currently coming from Japan. And so we're actually flying out in like a week or so to spend time with our Japanese community, just to meet them in person, kind of educate them about the ecosystem, and then also just like give out merch, right? Because like I think merch, people, if you sport it out in the wild and people see the merch, then they'll want to learn about the project if they don't already know about it.
I'll say sometimes content is very overrated. Like everybody's producing content in Web3. I don't need to talk too much about that. But then I would say from a kind of compared to Web2, I would say brand and SEO is a bit underrated in Web3, I would say. Because if you build a compelling brand and have a very consistent storyline as well, and then have SEO against it, it can actually be done really well. So one company in Web3 that I've seen it do well is Alchemy, for example. Every time I look for like, what's the best DeFi app on this chain, it's like the Alchemy website comes up first. And so I thought that was very intelligently done. So I don't see it generally as part of marketing plans in Web3, but I think it can be very powerful if done well.
I guess one last point is like buy-in from the community, right? Like a lot of buy-in currently happens from like retroactive airdrops, whether it's like you've participated in the community or whatnot. But I think one of the more interesting kind of projects that's coming out, I don't know if people here have heard of Echo.xyz, but basically it decentralizes the access to private deals, right? Like anybody in the community can buy into hot projects. I think the first project that was sold on Echo was Athena, which obviously most people know about the ENA token now. So like getting early community buy-in into projects is another way to bootstrap kind of marketing and go to market.
What about geography? Like I guess we're in Hong Kong. Obviously, there's a big engaged Asian community, whether that's the Chinese community, Korean community, Japanese community, wherever, Southeast Asia generally. How do you guys think about like and each of these communities have different styles and preferences, platforms. Like, how do you think about engaging different types of communities and with different sort of cultural preferences and languages and whatever?
I can go first. I think we're really looking at the consumer angle, so you can always start with a DeFi. Obviously, liquidity is deep on the States. The Western side is now we're seeing like Asia liquidity ramp up. But I'm a believer that the biggest consumer app in crypto will probably come from Asia. Because the Asian community likes collectibles and stuff. If you look at Korea, we're seeing a lot of adoption in terms of NFTs there. In the States and probably Western communities, NFTs are written off as like scammier or like more JPEGs. While in the Eastern community, it can be used as collectibles, be used in trading. Like anime is a big, like I'm really bullish on anime and crypto and seeing like overlap there. So I think the consumer angle and actually adoption for any consumer apps would happen in the East. Liquidity and probably venture still stays Western dominant, I would say, for the short to midterm. We'll see how that plays out in macroeconomics.
I would say that there's actually like no substitute to having people on the ground in these different regions, right? I think a great way to start is by having investors, team members, community members, just groups that are actually in the region that you can use as a source of, I suppose, boots on the ground intel, an understanding of what's happening in the ecosystem that will not always make its way into Twitter or Telegram or whatever sort of extended offline forms of communication you have. But for us, especially as we think about expansion, I think we've seen a lot of chains do one of two things. They either index incredibly hard on the West or they index incredibly hard on the East, and one community or one side ends up feeling shafted at the end of the day, right? So what we've really been focusing on is, especially like pre-TGE, has just been going a little bit more horizontal, making sure we have someone in Korea, making sure we have someone who's spending time in Japan, Southeast Asia, India, Latin America, eventually Africa, everything in between, or just major community partners. And I think another group that can do this in a very interesting manner, especially for like L1s or larger decentralized networks, is like, validator groups. They tend to do a lot in terms of community engagement, in terms of, sort of producing content, like hosting meetups, everything in between. So I guess the way we've thought about it is, first layers of involvement end up being the validators, the community, the investors that we already have that are on the ground. Second layer, and what you ultimately want to end up with, is actually having team members in each of these geographies who are just, the people who know people, right? You want access, and you want to understand what the inner word is, not just what you hear circulating like 3 weeks later.
Yeah, totally agree with all those sentiments. Definitely agree in horizontally kind of scaled communities, so it's not super overweight in the US or maybe in Turkey or parts of Asia. And part of the KOL kind of round should reflect all of that as well, because then you have the key influencers on the retail side. One additional distinction I'd add is also the distinction between consumer and institution. So for example, one of the things we're doing early is to make sure that we talk with kind of OTC desks like Brevin Howard and Republic and so on, because that's going to be very important later on from a kind of token community perspective. And so just one additional point there.
Paul, how do you think about B2B versus like consumer go-to-market in crypto? I guess most of your customers are other projects. Like how do you, I guess, does the consumer part matter at all?
I think for us, we are primarily B2B, so it is a little bit different from an approach vector. We find that going to market between each of the eastern and western areas to be like, it's similar but different. So like there's like a saying in Singapore, same but different, right? So for us, because we're going to kind of businesses or basically like more enterprises, even though it's a little bit more homogenous, we find certain things to be a little bit more easier. Things like in Asia, right? People a little bit more price sensitive, right? But they're also very high commitment, and they'll tell you right away. There's full transparency to it's a yes or a no in the first meeting. I think for Western teams, price sensitivity is not there, but commitment is a little bit harder to do. So I think these little like minute details of going to market definitely do show in like culture, also language, and I think that does also probably mean the same thing for consumer as well, right? There's these little differences that you have to understand in order to kind of go to market effectively. And for us, we've been a little lucky that we've been focusing on the B2B angle and not consumer, because consumer is very hard, right? In Web2, going to market in Asia is extremely different than going to market in North America. So we've been a little bit blessed to kind of avoid all that stuff, but I give you guys a lot of credit for being able to bridge the gap between East and West for consumers.
and for the rest of you guys, how do you think about picking vendors in crypto? Is that different? Is that, many of you have experience pre-crypto outside of the crypto industry. What's your take on how vendors can be successful at working with your teams?
UX. I think the vendors that have the best UX, Notify. That actually, like, let's say you're using a DeFi app or a gaming app, you should be able to not really worry about notifications, not really worry about like the APIs you're using. I think RPCs are very important. So I think just having the best UX for developers and users is priority for any service provider.
I'd say there's a distinction between, is this like a real partnership or is this a mindshare marketing partnership? Because one thing that I've seen that's really funny to me is that there's a bunch of partnerships that get announced that make like zero technical sense and are actually not really going to work or scale. And so there's kind of that type of partnership, which I will not talk about, but then more the real type of integrations than really thinking about, well, what is the technology stack? How long does it take to integrate? What are the different options presented from a kind of cost-performance trade-off? What's important to your particular project? Is like a huge bottleneck, for example, aggregating a bunch of ZK proofs that then need to be super cheap in order for your system to work. Well, then it's really important that you have a vendor like that that really helps you on that, unless you can do it yourself. And then there's many other configurations there too. The other thing that's different too is that go-to-market in Web3 versus Web2 is you usually launch a DevNet, then a public testnet, and then a mainnet. In Web2, usually you have the you can easily launch something within a week or over a weekend just to test it out with a bunch of users. That's much harder in a decentralized context. And so who are the vendors that can actually accelerate things for you and help with the infrastructure needs? So that's what I'd add.
I think that within the vendor side, there's actually a fairly low bar at the moment for the most part, and that there's a lot that can be done broadly just by thinking a lot more about customer success, right? Like, do you have a team that responds to you really quickly, that knows about your business beyond like the one layer, like the one line tagline, and actually perhaps has either connections or intangibles that can help beyond the scope of their specific service, right? So if Paul's able to say, hey, I can help you with this, but I can also introduce you to a whole bunch of DeFi builders, that's more interesting for us than a random other notification service of some sort, right? So I think that the weird intangible value adds become incredibly important for vendors. I also think that there's a number of institutions, especially, that only want to work with certain vendors, right? So certain investors only want to use Fireblocks, or certain investors only want to use BitGo, et cetera, on the custody side. Certain exchanges require you to have certain custody providers, everything in between. So I think that there's also a weird set of like monopolies that exist under the hood in the space that are not even as customer success driven. But I think that that's very much like a low bar that a lot of people can do a great job in, including Paul, of course. He kills it.
Thank you.
There's a lot of, to this point actually, there's a lot of ecosystem integration that happens, I guess, behind closed doors, where it's about what's the token swap, a token exchange, what is the financial incentive as well. Hey, I'm going to airdrop a bunch of tokens to you so that we're fully incentive aligned. Then there's some form of exclusivity that also happens. So yeah, that's a great point. Kind of what is the ecosystem value add that you can deliver to your vendors?
Sounds like Paul's getting a lot of airdrops.
We just need the
non-financial
ERC20. What's your ERC20?
So maybe we're getting towards the end of the panel, but maybe I know it's an exciting year. A lot of stuff's happening. I know all of you have interesting sort of launches coming up. Maybe each of you want to spend like 30 seconds to a minute talking about sort of, I guess, what's next, what's interesting. What should people look out for? Anything specific that you want to share?
I guess for us, one of our bigger announcements that we're going to be going out with in the next couple of weeks is native integration in wallets. So like Coinbase Wallet, MetaMask. We believe that providing notification services beyond just like the last mile from a UI UX perspective is essential to work with wallet providers. So that's going to be something to look forward to.
Yeah. For us, I think the biggest thing that's around the corner really is mainnet and TGE. That'll happen sometime within the next few months before the end of the year. So I think that'll be a very exciting few months for us. In the interim, we're just sort of getting all of our our I's dotted and our T's crossed heading up to all that. I think some of the near-term exciting stuff will probably be a formal raise announcement. And I think beyond that will be a lot of the stuff happening in the ecosystem. So, the Bearchain ecosystem is one that we've seen, I think, an unprecedented level of engagement at the pre-launch stage. So, I know personally of like 10 plus projects that have raised private rounds, and beyond that, just sort of natively in the ecosystem, there's groups that have done NFT mints, pre-sales, et cetera, that are close to $50 million worth of capital brought in there already. And that's not us. That's not the chain. That's just the projects building on top of it. So I'm just incredibly excited to see what happens when those guys get to go at full speed, and they're unshackled per se, and the chain goes live.
We launched our version of points program called Apothecary about 3 weeks ago, and we just recently crossed 100 mil in TVL across our ELX ETH and our native deposits. I guess the next exciting thing will be also we're going live with mainnet and TGE later this year as well.
Yeah, mainnet TG, I guess, for all of us. But I think from a narrative point of view, like, parallelization is like very hot right now, but I think it's largely over-indexed on like high throughput blockchains. That's definitely the future. We're seeing a lot of congestion on Arbitrum, ZK Sync, some of the bigger EVMs right now, and everyone wants to have like a Solana-like feeling on Ethereum. But I think we're trying to push that narrative as well as also focusing security. Something very dear to me is making sure that we're not getting contracts hacked, making sure that we have infrastructure stack that's secure for retail and liquid funds and family offices and whatnot. So we're trying to make security sexy again.
Yeah, for us, we just announced our pre-seed raise a couple weeks ago, and then public testnet is coming out next week, so definitely watch out for that. Join our Discord community to be the first to know how to access it, what to do, how to become node operator. And then we'll have lots of really exciting announcements over the next few months as far as big ecosystem integrations, like accelerator programs launching, AI Launchpad type of announcements that will come out. So definitely follow us on Discord, follow us on X, and be part of the journey. Super excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being on the panel. Thanks for sharing pretty candidly. And thanks to our host at Wanxiang for providing us with a platform to engage with the community in Asia. So until next time.